night of February 4th, 1974, in a quiet apartment on Benvenue Avenue, everything seemed ordinary. 19-year-old Patricia Campbell Hearst, Patty, was curled up in her Berkeley home with her fiancé Stephen Weed. The world outside buzzed with college chatter, the distant echo of anti-war protests, the low hum of streetlights. Inside all was calm. Then came the knock. At first, soft, harmless, but then harder, louder, a pounding that rattled the thin wooden door. Stephen frowned, rising from the couch. "Who is it?" he called out. Silence. Then the door shattered inward like a cannon blast. 3 figures stormed in, black ski masks, rifles gleaming under dim lamplight. The smell of leather and sweat hit the room like a wave. Stephen barely had time to shout before a rifle stock slammed into his skull with a crack that echoed like thunder. He collapsed, moaning, choking on his own breath. Patty screamed, a sound ripped from the core of her being, only to be silenced by a gloved hand crushing her mouth. Another man yanked her by the arm so hard her shoulder nearly dislocated. She kicked, thrashed, nails clawing at the air, but a blow to the ribs folded her like paper. Something cold pressed against her temple. A voice like steel hissed, "Move again, and you die." The world turned into chaos. Shouts, boots on hardwood, Stephen crying out, gagging on blood. Then came the chokehold, tight, crushing, Patty's vision blurred, breath strangled by an arm like a vice. Her last image before darkness claimed her, Stephen's eyes wide with horror as she was dragged out of her own life. When she woke, the world was pitch black, cramped, stinking of gasoline. Her wrists burned from the ropes biting into her skin. A car trunk, the engine roared, carrying her deeper into the jaws of something she could not yet name. And somewhere, deep inside, a truth began to claw its way up. Patty Hearst was no longer a person. She was property, and the people who owned her would make sure she never escaped alive. The trunk opened. A blast of cold air hit her like a slap. Patty squinted against harsh light as hands yanked her out, dumping her onto gravel. Her knees scraped raw. A voice barked, "Move." She staggered forward, blindfolded again, stumbling as they dragged her into a house that smelled of damp wood and sweat. They threw her into a closet, slammed the door. Darkness swallowed her whole. The space was barely big enough to kneel in. Her wrists throbbed from the ropes, and her gag left her mouth dry and raw. For hours, maybe days, that closet became her world. No window, no sound except the pounding of her own heart, and the occasional muffled voice beyond the door. Hunger gnawed at her belly until it felt like knives twisting inside. When they fed her, it was scraps, a piece of bread shoved through the door, water in a dirty cup. The first time she spoke, asking for a blanket, a boot slammed against the door so hard she flinched. "Shut the hell up," a voice roared. Silence followed, heavy as a tomb. Sleep came in snatches, broken by nightmares and the scrape of the door opening. Sometimes it was just a hand shoving food in. Sometimes a voice leaning close, whispering things she didn't understand. "Do you know why you stir here, Hearst? You stir part of history now. Say goodbye to your old life." On the third day, they staged her execution. 2 men dragged her out, blindfolded, wrists bound. The cold press of a gun touched the back of her skull. She sobbed, begging, until a click echoed, the hammer cocking back. Her breath froze. Then came laughter, cruel, mocking. "Not today," one said. "But remember, We can end this any time. Fear became her oxygen. It seeped into her bones, rewiring her mind. Every command became a law. Every word they spoke carved itself into her brain like scripture, and slowly, painfully, the girl who had screamed on that Berkeley floor began to die. They called themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA, revolutionaries they said, freedom fighters. But to Patty, they were gods with guns, and she was clay in their hands. The closet became a classroom, not in the way of desks and chalkboards, but of indoctrination. They spoke in endless monologues about oppression, capitalism. They fed her slogans instead of food, death to the fascist insect that preys upon the life of the people. They chanted until the words drummed in her skull like war drums. When she resisted, punishment came swift, a slap that snapped her head sideways, a fist to the gut that stole her breath. Once, they fired a shot past her ear, the sound exploding like a bomb, leaving her deaf for hours. Next time, it's your head, they warned. She learned obedience the hard way. Repeat the slogans, memorize the creed. Deny your old self. They stripped her name first. You stir not Patty anymore, they said. You stir Tania. Tania, the name of a revolutionary martyr. They carved it into her like a brand, and slowly, the transformation began. It wasn't love. Stockholm Syndrome is never love. It was survival. Her mind bent under the weight of fear and hunger, twisting into shapes she never thought possible. She began to believe them, or at least she told herself she did, because belief meant life. Doubt meant death. By the time they placed a gun in her hands, she didn't hesitate, not because she wanted to fight, but because refusing wasn't an option. The gun felt heavier than anything Patty had ever held, cold steel biting into her palms. Her wrists still bore rope burns, but now they wanted her to wrap those same hands around death. She hesitated, her pulse pounding so hard it roared in her ears. Cinque, the leader of the SLA, his real name Donald DeFries, watched her with a gaze sharp enough to slit throats. You want to live, Tania? He asked. His voice wasn't angry, it was calm, patient, deadly. Patty nodded, lips trembling. Then you pull that trigger when I tell you. That night, they drove her to a remote field. A battered car waited there, its headlights stabbing the darkness. Inside the trunk lay a mannequin dressed like a man, a target for her obedience. They shoved the gun back into her hands. Shoot, Cinque ordered. Patty's hands shook so violently the barrel clattered against her knees, her eyes blurred with tears. The world tilted. But then, bang, the recoil kicked into her shoulder like a violent lever. Smoke curled upward, the stench of gunpowder clawing her nostrils. Another shot, then another, until the mannequin's head exploded into pulp and stuffing. Cinque smiled. You stir one of us now. And that was the night Patty Hearst ceased to exist. In her place stood Tania, a soldier for the revolution. The transformation didn't happen in an instant. It seeped into her veins, slow poison dripping into her soul. They cut her hair short, dressed her in berets and combat fatigues, fed her lines like a director coaching an actress for a role she couldn't refuse. Days later, the world saw her new face. A grainy surveillance photo captured during the Hibernia Bank robbery in San Francisco on April 15, 1974. Patty, sorry Tania, stood gripping an M1 carbine rifle, jaw clenched, eyes cold and unflinching. Her voice echoed through the bank lobby. Everybody down, this is a revolution. The image splashed across every newspaper in America. The heiress turned terrorist. The debutante turned outlaw. People stared at that photo, chilled to the marrow, wondering how could this happen? How could the granddaughter of publishing giant William Randolph Hearst become an armed revolutionary? But what the world didn't see was what happened before the robbery, the threats, the beatings, the whispered promises of death if she refused. They didn't see her huddled in the corner, after shaking, vomiting from terror. They only saw the picture, and that picture burned itself into history. Once you spill blood, even if it's not yours, you can never wash it off. The SLA dragged Patty deeper into their spiral of chaos. They weren't Robin Hood outlaws stealing from the rich for the poor. They were butchers cloaked in rhetoric, and now Patty was tethered to them like a corpse on a meat hook. Shootouts became a way of life. Sirens in the distance, bullets whining like wasps through the air, the smell of cordite and copper thick in her lungs. Each raid, each robbery, pushed her further from the girl who once studied art history at Berkeley. Then came the day of fire, May 17, 1974. A Los Angeles neighborhood erupted in violence as the FBI and LAPD closed in on an SLA hideout. The house burned like hell's own furnace. 6 SLA members died in a storm of bullets and flames. Patty wasn't there. She watched it unfold on TV, heart pounding, but it carved something jagged into her soul. She realized something in that moment. There was no going back. If the SLA could burn, so could she, and maybe deep down that thought terrified her more than death. Blood clung to every step now. When the SLA moved to new safe houses, the stench of gun oil and paranoia followed. They trusted no one. Neither did Patty. She slept with one eye open, gun always within reach, like a dog chained to a nightmare. And yet, somewhere inside, she felt the last thread of hope fraying. Would the FBI come? Would they kill her too? Or worse, leave her to rot in the pit the SLA had dug? September 18, 1975. The door splintered. Shouts of FBI, hands up, exploded like thunderclaps in the cramped apartment. Patty froze mid-step, heart clawing its way out of her chest. For a split second, she thought it was another SLA trick, another mock execution. But this was real. Armed agents stormed in, rifles leveled. Patty raised her hands, voice trembling as she whispered, "Don't shoot." The cuffs bit into her wrists, cold steel, familiar now. Her mugshot, taken hours later, would become infamous. Not the photo of a victim saved, but of a woman staring blankly into the camera, her eyes flat, emotionless, almost inhuman. People looked at that picture and saw a traitor, but the truth was locked behind those eyes, where screams still echoed, where shadows still crawled. When they searched her belongings, they found revolutionary manifestos, weapons, maps, evidence stacked like bricks in a wall that would soon become her prison. The headlines screamed, "Heiress turned terrorist captured." The world gasped. But Patty said nothing. She had learned silence well. The courtroom became a theater, and Patty Hearst the unwilling star. The prosecution painted her as a willing criminal, a spoiled heiress, seduced by violence. The defense told a different story, a young woman brutalized, brainwashed, reshaped by terror. Psychologists debated Stockholm Syndrome on live TV. Could fear really twist a mind so far it bends to its captors? Could love bloom from the roots of terror? Or was it just survival wearing a mask? Patty sat through it all like a ghost. When the guilty verdict came, she barely flinched. 7 years in federal prison. 7 years to replay every scream, every gunshot, every whispered threat in the dark. But prison wasn't forever. In 1979, President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence. Later, President Bill Clinton granted a full pardon. She walked free, but freedom is a cruel illusion when the bars are in your head. Even now, decades later, some call her a victim, others a traitor, but the truth? The truth never escaped that closet on Benvenue Avenue. Patty Hearst lives quietly now, far from the headlines that once blazed her name in fire, but somewhere, buried under layers of years, the echoes remain, the blindfold pressing against her skin, the voice hissing, "Move again, and you die." The gun in her hands, heavy as guilt. People love to believe monsters wear masks, but sometimes the masks come off, and the monsters are ordinary men with grand ideas and black rifles. And sometimes the monster grows inside you, born from fear, fed by survival, until you don't recognize yourself anymore. Was Patty Hearst a victim? Or did she become what she feared most? The answer rots in history like a locked door with no key. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. The pounding on the door, the shatter of wood, the voice whispering from the dark. You belong to us now. Fade to black,